afternoon. My name is Filip Kaczmarek, and I have great honor to host, together with my colleague Vittorio Prodi, this meeting. So welcome you at European Parliament, dear colleagues, dear guests. And I would like to welcome you on first European MEP policy dialogue of glass packaging in the European Parliament. It is not first meeting on glass packaging, but it's first meeting on as the permanent dialogue group on glass packaging. So first of all, I would like to thank you all of those who are able to make it here, fellow members of the European Parliament, including my colleague Vittorio Prodi, members of civil society organizations, and we really appreciate your attendance in this inaugural event. I hope that our meetings will be covering important policy issues as waste management, industrial policy, and sustainable consumption and production, to name just a few of them. I would like also to thank members of FEVE, European Container Glass Federation, for their participation in this event, as without their contribution and initiative, none of it would be possible. So FEVE is our main partner for this event. Glass packaging is a resource-efficient and endlessly recyclable material, which make in the perfect packaging material in the context of sustainable consumption and production. The creation of our group is an excellent opportunity to contribute and discuss issues which are important for industry and consumers alike. To do so, we need to know firsthand about the issues and understand the complexities in order to build a healthy and vibrant glass manufacturing base in Europe. With Europe being the largest producer of container glass in the world, this is a subject that affects all of us deeply. It is our expectations that this group will be able to greatly enhance the European Parliament's motivations and initiatives with respect to policy issues linked to the glass container industry. As Dr. Finkbeiner will elaborate on in a minute, life cycle assessment is an important methodology for the evaluation of material and energy fluxes and their impact on the environment. In the most cases, life cycle assessment has been utilized on industrial processes to determine the environmental impacts of the life cycle of a specific product. As the life cycle assessment approach is aimed at improving the ecological efficiency of the process or product, it has a wide range of potential uses. Although it can be a useful tool in assessing a product's impact on the environment, there is much criticism of LCA. Many claim that it is oversimplified system, with some going as far as stating that in reality it doesn't help the consumers, the industry, or the environment. Issues have been raised with regard to the comparability between studies of the same process and weighting the criteria between different environmental impacts. That has the potential of being unbalanced, which highlights the need to conduct rigorous analysis to verify the validity of the data used for the analysis, which is often not done to appropriate standards. I will let Dr. Finkbeiner elaborate further on this matter, as he is the real expert on the subject. We are extremely happy and honored to have with us Professor Dr. Matthias Finkbeiner, who is currently Chair of Sustainable Energy and Vice Director of the Department of Environmental Technology at Technical University Berlin. He is also Advisory Professor of Aalto University in Finland, Chairman of ESOT Committee of Life Cycle Assessment, member of the International Life Cycle Board, of the Life Cycle Initiative and the Steering Committee of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol Product Supply Chain Initiative of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Very long title.
I'm German.
Early in his career, he was manager for life cycle engineering at the Design for Environment Department for Mercedes-Benz cars at Daimler AG in Stuttgart and Vice Director Environmental Management at PA International. He has more than 15 years experience in the life cycle assessment projects and served as chair of a critical review panel of LCA studies of feather, for example, and GPI. I would like to inform you that our meeting will be videotaped and web streamed, so if you take the floor, please switch on micro to have a chance to be heard by people who will be observers in net. And now I will go floor to Mr. Finkbeiner, please.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, and welcome to my contribution to the session. I was asked to talk about the gaps of life cycle assessment, and as you have heard, I've been working for the last 15 to 20 years in the field of LCA, and so it was an interesting challenge for me to address this topic. I would like to briefly give a very short introduction for the sake of time, and then show some results of a gap analysis in the LCA method which we performed for FEWE, and give some examples that are particularly relevant for glass packaging, as this is the focus of this meeting, before coming to some conclusions. Well, LCA is on the agenda these days somehow, as has been already mentioned, and even in public media like this recent feature of the Time magazine, it says that ecological intelligence is one of the top 10 ideas changing the world right now. I'm not quite sure whether this is true, but the content of this feature is quite true. And it says, when it comes to going green, intention can be easier than action. And this is painfully true. We all agree that we want to protect the environment, but how to measure it and how to be sure that the actions we intend to take actually meet the target is not so straightforward. And even in this feature now of the Time magazine, they mention life cycle assessment as one of the tools that can help in this regard. The tool as such actually established quite some global stakeholder acceptance, thanks also to the international standards developed by ISO. We have the core standards are ISO 14040 and 44, and they are approved unanimously by all the countries involved in that, so they really represent the constitution of the LCA as a method. Also UNEP, so the United Nations Environmental Programme, has a life cycle initiative that tries to promote LCA on a global basis, especially also involving developing countries, because all our supply chains these days extend also at one point or another into developing countries. Coming to Europe, already in 2003, the European Commission, as part of their communication on integrated product policy, said that LCAs provide the best framework for assessing the potential environmental impacts of products currently available. So it says it's the best we have, but it's not perfect. But based on that, quite some development happens. The European platform on life cycle assessment was established at the JRC in ISPRA. David Pennington is here representing that. And fairly recently, the European Commission proposed a methodology for the calculation of products and companies' environmental footprint. And even though it's a different term, it's basically a particular LCA methodology that is proposed here. So you see, LCA came a long way, and I was preaching LCA for many years, and I'm happy that it's used now, but sometimes now it's a bit overused in the sense that some of the limitations are not seen anymore. And that was part of the job we had here, that we try to give a balanced view to address some of the gaps that are still in this methodology. And we structured that in these 4 parts. Some of the limitations that are already addressed in this international standard, which is the basis for all the developments, some inherent methodological limitations, and then limitations in impact assessments. When we talk about the impacts that we assess, this is a key feature of the method. And we also have some practical limitations. Let me start with the ISO standard, because this is the basis, as I said, but some people forget already the issues that are mentioned there. It's a lot of text, so I will only highlight a few points. So the ISO standard as such says, for example, in 44, 5.4.3, that the LCA is not a complete assessment of all environmental issues of a product system under study. So the ISO standard as such is very transparent in the sense that it tries to be comprehensive, but in every study there are limitations. We have limitations from the inventory phase, where we look into the energies and material needed, because there are always data gaps and certain cutoffs, things which we could not consider in a particular study. In the LCA method, we lose the spatial and temporal information where the emissions have occurred by definition of the method. And this, of course, introduces uncertainty into the LCA results. That's why the standard also says that there are no generally accepted methodologies how to do that in a consistent manner. So it means it's a value choice which impact assessment method you use. Two more. When we come to comparison, the standard clearly says that LCA shall not provide the sole basis for a comparison, because there are some other methods that need to be used to complement the inherent limitations. And the final point, because you mentioned also the issue of weighting, the ISO standard also clearly says that there is no scientific basis for reducing LCA results to a single score or number. And the standard also clearly says for comparative assertions that are published, you are not allowed to use a single score result. In summary, the standards are very explicit with regard to the limitations. They address the benefits and the good uses in the same explicit way, but they always says for every study you have to balance your results with the limitations of the method. Next block are the so-called inherent limitations of the method. And in this 15 to 20 minutes, I can address them only on a very high level and not every one of them. But some of the things I like to address is one of the key features of the method is the functional unit. And as a functional unit is a term that tries to ensure fair comparison. So if you want to compare, for example, aluminum and steel for making a car part, it makes no sense to compare 1 kilogram of steel with 1 kilogram of aluminum. You have to compare them based on the same function. And this is one of the good things the methods have to make it fair comparison. On the other hand, it means also you do that on a microeconomic level, usually one piece of product or 1 kilogram of a product. But the real environmental effect, of course, happens on a macroeconomic scale. So if you compare, for example, an electric vehicle with a conventional vehicle, based on the few number of vehicles we have today, the LCA result might be very different than if we have a fleet of 20 million vehicles. So that's what we understand as an inherent limitation of the method. A second one, which I like to briefly mention because it's quite very often discussed, is the allocation problem. Very often we have industrial processes that lead to more than one product, and if we study only one of those, it's a value choice how we distribute the environmental burden between them. Next block looks even more busy, and again I will not go into all of them, but the impact assessment is a phase of LCA that has been researched a lot, but still we have to be honest that there are still significant limitations today. If you let me start from the lower end here, the topic of biodiversity is one of the big topics in environmental protection, and despite intensive research, we have not really managed yet to develop a practicable and robust indicator to include biodiversity into LCA studies. We have ongoing discussions also how well you can address the issue of human and ecotoxicity in LCA, because that also needs spatial and temporal information, which is usually lost. There have been quite some substantial progress. One of the methods here, which is basically coordinated by UNEP, is this use tox model. But still there, we have only characterization factors for about 2,000 or 3,000 substances, whereas the real toxic effect, we have about 200 substances which are relevant for that. So the coverage is still not there where it should be. Going to the other side, and we will come to one or two examples that are more packaging relevant in a minute. But let me also address the first one, water consumption, or nowadays the term water footprint is used a lot. The Independent recently had a headline, "Water is the new carbon." So freshwater availability is still globally the #1 environmental problem, where currently most people actually die from environmental issues. And this has been somewhat overlooked in the LCA methodology, and it's just now catching up how we can assess that. Last one, if we apply things, we also have some practical limitations. And very prominently, data availability and also data quality is a constant issue. Again, there have been a lot of improvement over the years, but of course, still every study outcome is also determined by the availability and the quality of the data you have. That's why also for every comparison, especially, you have to carefully look how robust is this result or how sensitive is this result. Due to the nature of the complex methodology, we cannot really apply statistical methods to determine the uncertainty very easily. So in that sense, we have to find and address proper ways to really get a feeling for the robustness of the LCA results. This is a very high-level overview, and I would like now to go into a few examples out of this which are particularly relevant maybe for glass packaging. The first one I already mentioned, water footprint. Currently, in most LCA studies, freshwater scarcity is not really addressed, if at all, in the inventory level. But a cubic meter of water in Brussels is something completely different than a cubic meter of water in the south of Spain or even in Sudan. So we have to find impact assessment models that actually are able to address the real issues when it comes to water. For packaging systems, of course, we can have different influences, and the consequences should be assessed in the future because it's not done today. The next one is microbiological pollution. When we go to the effect on human beings in LCA, we focused so far on the chemical effects. But the story I usually tell in one of the first LCA studies I did when I joined university, we were asked to support Egypt in the selection of wastewater treatment technologies in the Nile Delta. And we were asked to perform LCAs for that. And then we introduced that and all the different impacts we can look at. And at the end of my presentation, they asked them, well, our real problem is the bacteria in the wastewater. In which of your impact categories do you actually cover that? And then, woo, that was a real hit, because I have to say, yeah, right now we don't have it. Yeah? So actually the microbiological pollution, especially in water, is neglected. And this could be also a relevant issue, of course, for packaging systems, because the surface properties are different, how bacteria can develop there. Yeah, terrestrial and marine littering. I think when you come look at packaging, this is quite an emotional topic that is also discussed these days, which is basically as a result of inappropriate disposal of packaging. And this is also, it can have different effects, of course, direct killing of animals, it has leaching of chemicals, of course it has also aesthetical issues. And it's a packaging issue, but so far we have no way how we could implement that in an indicator within LCA. And this is probably also quite a tricky one to implement there. Last one is the direct health effects of products. In LCA, usually we assess the toxicity through releases to the environment. But when it comes to packaging, of course, and suppose you have a drink and you have some chemical effect of the packaging on this drink, this does not hit you through an emission from the environment, but directly. You get some direct health effects from the product's use. And this is typically not included in LCA, but this leaching of chemicals in some of the packaging system could have potentially a relevant effect, which is currently not included in the LCA. I will skip this one for the sake of time and like to conclude. So I agree that LCA is probably the best method we have currently available to assess the environmental performance of products. I'm a fan of LCA. Yeah. But because I'm interested in a sustainable use of LCA and not just on a LCA or carbon footprint hype, it's also fair to balance this view that LCA can do many good things, but it also has limitations. And when you use it for decision making, you have to also consider the limitations that are there. And these limitations, again, are already in the standards. Some of them are quite inherent to the method. We have quite some limitations with regard to impact assessment, and we still have practical limitations. These gaps and choices have an obvious influence of LCA results in general, and of course also for container packaging. Some of these gaps are inherent to the method, so there is probably, this is a price you have to pay if you use this method. Some can be solved by future scientific work and progress. But if you have a method that looks into the complex system like LCA, you always have value choices. The impacts you look at or allocation decisions, these are value choices, and they can be scientifically informed, but at the end of the day, they remain value choices. From a scientific perspective, we can check whether they have been done consistently throughout the study, but there have been value choices, and this has to be quite transparent. Clearly, I think decision makers, both in private and public organizations, they should really appreciate the benefits they can get from LCA. But for a robust, sustainable, and credible use of the method in the long run, also the over-interpretation of LCA results has to be avoided, and LCA results have to be interpreted with proper consideration of the gaps and limitations. Because, as the LCA standard puts it, an LCA alone should not be the sole basis to provide your environmental decisions, because some of the issues cannot be covered by the method. And this was my short contribution to this discussion, and now I'm happy to answer any questions or address any statements and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting, and from my perspective, the gaps are bigger than I suppose that they are. So thank you for your presentations. And now we have Adeline Farrelly from Further to comment your presentations after we start discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kaczmarek. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. First of all, I would just like to take the opportunity of thanking both Dr. Prodi and Dr. Kaczmarek for offering us this platform. It's very important for, if we want to develop a sustainable, competitive, innovative economy, our industries all need a place, in fact, to go to discuss the issues that really impact our businesses. I mean, it's important today to be able to create jobs and to maintain jobs. And with the container glass industry, we can't delocalize. We're not like the IT industry. We have to produce here in Europe, and we want to continue to produce in Europe. But we need to do that on the right conditions, and we need to be a sustainable industry if we want to continue to do that. So I think it's very important that we have this platform in our journey towards sustainability, because sustainability is not, in our view, a place you just go. It's really a whole journey, and there will be issues that come up in that journey that we need to discuss. And I think that this topic today is one of the issues that we want to discuss. And it's a very important topic because policymakers, I mean, most of you around the room, many of you, you're all from the packaging sector, the glass sector. You are aware that the LCA is being used by policymakers, by brands, by retailers to make decisions. And one of those examples we can give is the example of the light bulbs. The light bulbs were banned in Europe based in part on an LCA data and LCA justification. And so, but having banned that, it also opens another problem. I mean, the lamps that were replacing the old lamps have got mercury in it. That creates other problems. And on top of that, it's been a nightmare, actually, from a social perspective, from a lot of the older generation who have to change everything towards that. So we have to be careful when we're making decisions that we don't try to take a kind of quick route down the line. And we want to put this on the table for discussion. We want to be able to, we ourselves did our own life cycle analysis on the container glass industry. It was a very complete, complex project. It involved really a huge amount of data. And I think, Professor Funkbetter, you were on the critical review panel for that. I think that you will agree that it was a very, very complete, wide scope LCA. And because of that experience we've had in it, we are aware that there are a number of issues that are not covered today, even by our own LCA. And so we want to have a discussion about that. That's why this is one of the tools here that we would like to use to be able to discuss with policymakers. And I'd like to open the floor, basically, to everybody in the room. We would like to have your views on some of the gaps that have been highlighted here. Can we address them what way can we address them? Can we address them together? Do we address them on our own? But it does really merit discussion. And from a container glass point of view, I mean, our product, we believe, is not only, as I said, a local industry, but it's 100% recyclable, reusable, refillable. It is also a product that is virtually inert, so it protects absolutely the product inside. We believe that some of these attributes are not adequately addressed either in LCA, and therefore these functionalities of our product should be taken into account. And so I would like to just leave it there and really open the floor to hearing some views from the participants here today. Kindly came to be with us for a discussion. Don't be shy.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I'm Nicolas Robin, I'm representing a glass packaging company, OI. I mean, we're talking about sustainability. Usually we have three pillars of the sustainability. We have the environment, we have the social, and we have the economic. Today we're talking about the environmental LCA. We know that the social LCA is really at the infant stage. Economic LCA doesn't exist, more or less. So how we can be sure to have a full view of sustainability of a product or a company if we are using just one pillar?
It's very hard to be sure whether you are sustainable. And if you look at only one pillar, then it's very brave. Of course, you're right. There are many different definitions of sustainability. Some even go beyond the 3 dimensions, but I think the 3 dimensions you mentioned, environment, economy, and social, are really the baseline. Here we focus on environmental LCA. You also mentioned that we have early developments in social LCA. We also have assessment methods like life cycle costing, but in the economic pillar and in the social pillar, they are in a very early stage of development. And of course, for a complete sustainability picture, we have to address them. Basically, I still think that even also for the other sustainable dimensions, this life cycle view, that you don't only look at your own operations gate to gate, is the right view. But for social LCA, they're currently at UNEP level. Big projects try to move that ahead, and there are first guidelines. But this is unfortunately still, I would say, below the level to be operational. So that if you want to have a complete sustainability picture, but you have to find complementary tools right now to really make that accountable. But when you come to the social and economic part, the value choice issue is even more prominent. And that is, at the end of the day, from a scientific point of view, the biggest challenge. Because again, we can support that with methods and with consistency checks, but value choices, as a scientist, my value choices are not per se higher quality than from other stakeholders. Yeah.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. My name is Peter Kögler. I'm coming from SAB Miller. I'm an environmental officer there. When I'm talking about, we are doing life cycle analysis ourselves and carbon footprints, especially because SAB Miller, we are a global brewer, and we have our breweries from Poznan to Italy. We are filling our products in different types of containers. They might be PET, glass, metal cans, aluminium, steel, whatsoever. Some of these things are related to what is the market environment. If I'm going, for example, to Poland, I would say, yes, I have a very well-functioning, but unfortunately declining, returnable bottle market. If I'm going to Italy, for example, we have a returnable bottle fleet, but not with that many returns as in Poland, for example. So how does it's difficult for me to compare even the same returnable bottle from Poland with the same identical returnable bottle in Italy, depending on the returns and how many turns each bottle makes. Depending as well as how does the environment really look like. If I'm looking at my situation in Poland, I say, yes, it's a returnable bottle market. What are the other types of containers do we have, and how does the recycling and collection thing work, plus landfills. And in Poland, I know, yes, we have about 1,000 illegal dump sites, which means a certain amount of our products which we bring into the market will end up there at the end of the day anyway, so which we have to take into account these things. Not always one packaging material has the same life cycle and environmental footprint in one market than in the other one. Thanks.
Do you have a proposal for how you can solve that, or are you asking Dr. Fimpane the question of provide you some advice?
First of all, it would be always good to have some advice on this, because we are a brewing company and not a recycling or collection company.
Well, I think from your statement, I'm not sure how much advice I can provide, because all you said is correct. From an LCD methodological perspective, my approach would be, of course, ideally, people want simple answers. So they would have, like, the global truth is a bottle or a reusable bottle or a single-use bottle or a PET bottle better. But to answer that from a global perspective, because of what you mentioned, this will be hardly possible, because it depends on so many different things. And of course, then you can define a kind of base scenario, but if you then make the proper sensitivity analysis, you will see you will not have a significant difference. In order to get a significant difference, you have to ask a more precise question. And sometimes the disappointment of LCA, or that the outcome is it depends, is because sometimes you try to address too broadly framed questions with LCA. And it's not a wonder tool. So it cannot solve fundamental questions which cannot be solved. But if you, like you said, in a specific market with specific properties for a specific product, want to find out what is the proper packaging choice for that, chances are very likely that you can get an answer for the most probable decision. So basically the way you approach that to try to get it there is right, plus, and that's the key, try to find improvement options, and they are linked also to the real solutions.
thank you for your comment. I am from Poznan, so I know your brewery in Poznan. But I think that sometimes some concrete examples have to be put in the wider context. For example, in Poland, in 1 year, the law on waste management will be changed. Since 1st July 2013, the system will be completely new one. And it will have some impact also on collections of glass container. Because now, each household has to pay the price to the collections company. And the change will be that it will be paid to the local authorities. So in the old system, the local authorities had no motivations to check if somebody is paying. And in the new system, they will have the direct interest to check. And of course, the glass container will be for free. The collections of the all recyclable, paper, glass, plastic, and so on will be for free. So it will be the interest of household to select the wastes and interest of the local authorities to check if everybody is paying for that. So I think that it will have some impact on the whole system, including glass containers.
So sorry to come back with a question again. This new Polish change in waste collection, post-consumer waste collection, is this more like similar to what we have in Switzerland, so where municipalities are looking at these things, they are responsible to collect the different waste types and do recycling. But how will this affect our returnable bottle market, for example? Because returnables will not be recycled as quick as one-way bottles. So they are not in the waste stream immediately.
Expectations are that it will be much more difficult to avoid payment from the household. Yeah? So it will be more direct interest to select the waste. So it could have impact on the glass container, because now some people try to avoid. Yeah? So they are looking for other opportunities, and the local authorities has no motivation to check if they are paying or not. So it's more in psychological sphere, yeah, but it will be much more difficult to cheat the system than now.
So in a way, that would mean like a success of the new legislation would mean that the number of illegal dump sites would be reduced. So if we can say yes, in a few years' time,
yeah, it's the main target. It's the main target, and I hope that will be.
How much
fulfilled.
do they cost? Because they to clean them up and then have them back again a few weeks later is not a cheap thing.
It's very expensive, yeah. And the Poznan is one of the 2 cities in Poland where we have the biggest number.
Oh.
Yeah, so I am not very proud of it, but it's like that.
Is there anybody else who would like to share your views? Or should I be a bit provocative to get people to share their views? Well, I would like to ask the question make a statement first. I mean, there are times where you're looking at life cycle assessment as it is today and looking at the gaps that we have identified. It's difficult to avoid the impression, at least, that some gaps are there maybe by design. And I'm thinking of, for example, the fact that LCA doesn't capture health effects, the leaching of endocrine disruptors, for example, into the environment as a result of using a certain type of packaging, or the pollution in the oceans. Professor Finkbeiner, is this on purpose, or is it really a gap which is been very difficult to address? And is there a solution or a proposal to ensure that these aspects could be included in LCA in the future?
I don't think it's on purpose, at least not on my purpose. If I would have an idea how this could be implemented, and there is, I think we would do that. In both cases, they are relatively new. It depends on the perspective. So I think to implement the effect of endocrine disruptors in the human toxicity impact assessment category should be possible. This is then a data availability question. Once we have sufficient effect data, that this could be modeled. So I think we will see this endocrine disruptor question addressed at one point. With the littering issue, I think it's more tricky because all the effects that have a strong spatial component, as I mentioned, are a bigger challenge for the LCA method. So if you look at the littering question and you see these terrible images at one part of the ocean, then the question is, how do you allocate that back to one bottle when you do such a comparison? So it's a very big issue locally in the ocean, but if you then make somewhere in the world, and if you then make an LCA in Poland or in Italy to compare a bottle, how much of that littering effect can you blame or allocate, to use a neutral term, on this particular PET bottle? So, and this is the first challenge. This is what we call still on the inventory phase, in where you try to identify the inputs and outputs to the system, and this is already a challenge. Once you would have that, once you would know that, I don't know, 10 times minus 8 bottles are littered as a flow, then you would have to challenge what is the effect. And then, of course, it's very locally where it is, whether there are direct ingestion effects, leaching effects. So as a scientist, this is a challenge, and we will try to work on that. So we do not ignore that by purpose, but depending on the issues, there are more or less challenges. So as again, I would say with the endocrine questions, this would be easier to address. With the littering, maybe it needs people that are smarter than me to have a straightforward idea how this can be solved.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Again, me, sorry. I have just read about littering, like that when the Germans introduced the mandatory deposit scheme, the littering almost disappeared. Is this really like that we can say, yes, there is evidence with a mandatory deposit scheme you more or less get rid of littering, or are there other ways where we can say, yes, there are possibilities of where we can get rid of littering in other markets?
Thank you. Patrick Mann from RAP, the Waste and Resources Action Programme. We're a government-funded body in the UK. I wanted to make a couple of points. The first one was to say that we've been through quite a lot of these issues in the UK. RAP has done some LCA work. The Environment Agency has done some LCA work in the past, and they're not doing any more because of some of the issues that it tends to raise. And I guess we've moved on to a slightly different place where the work we're doing now through a new body working with industry called the Product Sustainability Forum, what we're trying to look at is, can you do hotspot analysis? So instead of taking LCA of one specific product and trying to do something about that, can you look more broadly across sectors to try and find not just for the packaging, but for the packaging plus the product, rather than there tends to be a big focus on what's the impact of the packaging, but can you actually go beyond that and look at the life cycle impact of the whole thing that you're trying to sell to a consumer, and try and focus in what bit of the life cycle of that packaging plus product creates the biggest impact, and then what can we do to reduce that impact, rather than ending up in a place where you're saying, right, so should we move it from presumably glass to plastic is clearly one of the issues you're concerned about. Can we instead say, okay, the biggest part of this, as, for example, Unilever certainly know, is that the biggest impact for an awful lot of their products is the consumer use phase. And so doing things that will certainly look good at the front end in terms of the design of the packaging of the shampoo won't actually have anywhere near the same impact as doing something that affects what the consumer chooses to do with that shampoo, because that's where the majority of the environmental impact occurs. So we're trying to move away from something that tends to focus on you're the bad boys, you packaging people, let's all beat up on you, and does something that is much more about improvement. The problem with that is it's much more long term, it's much more involved, and it's difficult to show ready outcomes. So if you're trying to persuade governments or individual politicians or lobby groups that you're doing something, it's a long process, and it's difficult to say from one year to another exactly what's happened. So I think there is always an issue. If you make things more complicated, yes, you may get a more accurate result, but it brings other complications. If in our case you go to sort of a broader idea, you can do more things potentially, but you may find it more difficult to persuade people of what you're doing. But that also, the other half of what I wanted to say was really about that issue that Unilever have found. One of the problems we had when we were trying to look at LCAs was the issue of how do you incorporate behavioural effects? Because if the classic one that happened in the UK was the LCA that the Environment Agency did about the difference between disposable nappies and washable nappies. And this was during a period when there was a lot of push within the UK to try and get more people to use non-disposable nappies. The problem with that is when you try and compare the LCA effects of the two, you get into a big issue of, well, if someone uses a reusable, a washable nappy, how frequently do they wash it? And do they wash it at high temperature or low temperature? And what else do they do? And how often do they change the baby? And suddenly, trying to do an LCA that tries to compare those two things in a fair way is incredibly difficult. And you end up potentially with the answer, it all depends. So I think that's another aspect of the limitations of LCA that are perfectly recognised within the LCA community, but sometimes aren't always recognised by others when they just look at the conclusions and try and draw a conclusion from it. So I think in short, my point is, yes, it's complicated, but perhaps we need to go away from LCA a bit towards other things. Use LCA when it's absolutely the right thing to use, but perhaps there are other methodologies to use if what you're trying to do is just try and reduce environmental impacts rather than trying to answer all questions about a product.
So advocating for focusing on hotspots of a production system where you actually try to deal with the environmental problem that's created in your own production system and using LCA to inform you on that. And that's what the idea is. I mean, Professor Finkbeiner, is that the way we should be using LCA rather than trying to use it as a communications tool, as a weapon? And is there a possibility in LCA to incorporate the impacts of a deposit system to minimise littering? I mean, is that something that can be addressed in LCA, or is that something that's outside the scope?
Let me start with the first one and then remind me of the second one. And with the hotspots, of course, hotspots are now everywhere, and it makes sense to look at hotspots. The question is, how do you find your real hotspots? Yeah? And this is actually a case where LCA has some success stories. Yeah? Finding the non-obvious hotspots. Because the obvious hotspots are very clear. Yeah? That the car, that the fuel consumption is an obvious hotspot is clear. But if you then move to electric mobility, what is then your hotspot? It's maybe not so obvious. So I'm not a fundamentalist saying use only LCA for that, use anyways to look at, but actually this hotspot approach, I think this is where LCA has some merit. I fully agree with the improvement approach. If I look in my, and we work for all kinds of stakeholders, and I work myself in industry for LCA, I would say more than 90% of the LCA work done today is done for internal purposes and improving the products. And I think there is definitely nothing wrong with that at all. If I improve my own operation as a company, also it's really my choice which impact I prioritize. Yeah? And then it's perfectly fine to do that. That's also why, and this is something you have to be careful, very often we discuss in LCA what is in the public domain. But also definitely less than 10% of the LCAs that are done, probably less than 5% are really public domain. Yeah? Because all the things that are done for designing products, for improving products, once you found an improving products, you don't necessarily put it on the public domain and inform your competitor about that. For any other approaches, I'm open. And of course, this improvement is a big, important application of LCA. With the littering system, I think you could try to address different policy options and the effect of that with LCA, but before you would have to define which physical consequence you assume. LCA will not tell you directly the efficiency of the policy instrument, but we could, with LCA, you could look into the effect if then the reusable share goes up by 5% or is decreased by 5%, and you have the model, you could look into that. But the direct effect of the policy measure, I think this would go beyond the scope of LCA. Last point on the shampoo, because that is very good with the hotspot, you're right. But what is the consequence? The consequence is either we do not wash our hair anymore, or if we still want to do that, we wash it with cold water at least. Yeah? So that's what I told Unilever. You should develop a shampoo where you can wash your hair with cold water and still feel comfortable. Yeah? So it's also a challenge, yeah? Even if you have the hotspot.
Any other remarks? Yes? Bertrand, yeah.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Bertrand Casse from Glass for Europe, the Association of Europe's manufacturers of building, automotive, and solar energy glass. So I won't be talking about bottle, but I think this discussion is very interesting, and maybe I can share with you some examples which I'm sure would be fruitful for thought. I think I would like basically to reinforce the importance of using LCAs for what it's meant for, i.e. to inform and help manufacturers improve their product design. But we should be careful about using LCAs to inform policies, because that can actually misguide them quite a lot. And I think particularly because of the problem you highlighted, the difficulty of impacting the impact of the product during its use phase. If I take the example of some of the products coming from flat glass, for instance, windows, it's easy to understand that there's no harmonized or agreed ways of actually assessing the impact of the product on the overall building. So basically all its use phase, which is quite long in the case of a window. And because of that, you find yourself in a situation where you sometimes have LCAs which actually consider that windows are using energy during their use phase, which is some sort of very strange thinking, which doesn't make a lot of sense when you compare it to other construction products where no energy use is accounted during the use phase. So, of course, then you have got a problem of comparability between products. But you also come to a situation where some people realize that this is a difficulty, so we should limit ourselves to actually the carbon that's embedded into the product. Interesting, but if you do that, then single glazing dated from the 70s will always perform better than an energy-efficient double glazing that is produced nowadays, and that will help save far more energy during the 30-year lifetime of the product. So these two very basic examples, which I think are easy to understand to everyone, are just meant to say and reinforce what you precisely said, that LCAs are not a wonder tool. We should carefully use it, but we certainly need to improve the tool before using it for other purposes.
Dr. Finbar, I'll ask you to respond to that and to maybe just conclude, and then I'd like to pass the floor to Dr. Prodi.
Yeah, thank you. 2 points. Again, you're right, and you have to watch the use of a tool. But also the borders there are reached. You cannot blame the tool if it's misused. So if someone makes an LCA of a window and ignores the use phase, this is simply misuse of LCA. Yeah, so, and this is a very bad argument. This is not a fair argument against it. So that's 1 point. Second point is, still, it's relevant to watch it. If you use a tool, you have to establish common practice, and this is, I think, the plea, because the trade-off is, you mentioned rightly, user behavior. Yeah? And you're perfectly right. Of course, in many products, with your assumptions on the user behavior, you can tune your result. And this is a limitation of the tool. But on the other hand, that's reality. Yeah? So the challenge for LCA is we try to look at the big piece of the environment, and of course in the big piece you have a lot of different angles. That's why I say LCA can help to show you this effect of the different user behavior, to understand it, to show you the effect of a window in a use phase. But because the system is unfortunately a bit complex, you have to be careful and not just take a handful of numbers and say A is better than B. The learnings between making sensitivity analysis, the learnings in understanding the effect of these different behaviors, the learnings of understanding the differences of the same packaging in Poland and in Italy, that, for me, is really the added value of LCA. Rather than taking, many people with LCA are focused on the final result. Yeah? A has 15 and B has 13. So A must be worse than B. But the real benefit is actually in coming up to the 13 and coming up to the 15, and then hopefully over time reduce both to 10. And that is basically my final word on that. I hope we can agree on that.
Well, it's been extremely interesting, and I have to admit that the only contact with this problem I had with my wife, that is using systematically glass vessels with a screw cap to preserve from meat sauce to jelly and so on. But this of course comprehend the complete reuse of that washing, and then of course heating and sterilizing by heat the vessel, and then of course with the screw cap you have vacuum inside that of course maintains the segregation of the content from the environment. So it is, but definitely glass is a wonderful material. We have found well-preserved contents from Roman thumbs and things like that, and so I think that of course we have to go as deep as possible with the life cycle analysis, but I think that for instance the collection of glass for reuse implies less energy and much less material than producing glass from sand and things like that. So I think that this is also something that has to be considered, because it is not reuse, but it is certainly recovery of the material, and environmentally and from the health point of view, this implies, again, the heating of the material to very high temperature for blowing the glass, and that is a guarantee for the sterilization, and of course for a use that is not distinguishable from the virgin glass from original materials. So I think that it is certainly a progress in the sense that at least the problem of disposal of broken glass or wine bottles is solved, and I think that could be, say, already enough to understand that this could be the solution. On the other hand, I have to confess that I would have preferred to reuse bottles of wine, but my winemaker is using only new bottles. And so this is not possible, but definitely the reuse, not the reuse, but recycle is still a very interesting solution. So. With the idea that we have any way to refine our life cycle analysis, I think that for glass there are already satisfactory solutions, and we could actually encourage to direct a collection of empty bottles or glass chips and recycle them in this way, because we have to understand that we shall get to a situation where natural resources and even for producing glass are limited, and we have to actually try to reuse or recycle the most. And actually glass, at least to my understanding, is lending itself to these solutions. And so with the, of course, with the agreement that we have to increase always our safety and security of products, but I think that glass is still a very promising material, and we have to thank for having it at disposal, because the recycling requires just energy and of course plants, but the result is guaranteed. So I think that we can see that as an example of the diligence and care we have to use to solve our problems. But I would say we have a very good basis to start from. And thank you for being here today.
There's a dinner, something to eat, just outside the corridor, and hopefully we can have a bit more conversation with each other. I think you're all a bit too shy to take the floor, so please have a drink and let's discuss.